So, my name is Crystal Schloss-Allen. I am part of the Black faculty and staff, and I'm also part of the Brooklyn College Anti Racist Coalition, as well as the PSC Anti Racist Coalition, and I'm also a higher education associate at Brooklyn College. And today I'm interviewing someone who doesn't need an introduction, Robert Jones Jr., also known as Son of Baldwin. Um, Also my really good friend, and I'm happy to see you, Robert.
It's good to see you.
Okay, so first thing I want to gush over the book because I finished it last night, and it was, you see all of the reviews about how it was beautiful and horrific at the same time, and it actually was. Like, it's one of those things where one of those books that one of the few books that I've read that really I feel has changed me and like affected me in a way. There was parts where I actually had to stop and take a break and come back because at the same time it was horrific, I knew there was beauty coming afterwards, especially in your descriptions, because like we always talk about like your writing, especially when you used to work here and used to do BC briefs. um the voice that you use to describe things is really beautiful. And um it like even getting through the hard and most difficult portions of the books, I'm trying not to spoil it for anyone who's still like in the middle, getting through those really hard parts of the books, the end of whatever pain that was happening, it was just like there was comfort in it.
Mm,
um so like, you're up there with my top books right now because it was really amazing,
thank
Robert.
you. Thank you
So
very
I
much.
really wanted to gush about that. And like, I guess in talking about your time here as not only a Brooklyn College student but as a staff member, um you I talked about, you wrote several articles, like several highlights of different people, and I was just wondering, did any of those stories influence how you developed or fleshed out the characters in the prophets?
Um, I don't think so. I don't think my nonfiction writing for Brooklyn College had any um, discernible impact on my writing as a fiction writer. At least none that I'm conscious of. However, my time as a Brooklyn College undergraduate student, particularly in the Africana Studies department, as you know, Africana Studies was my minor, that has probably had the most profound impact on my writing as a fiction writer, in particular on this novel, The Prophets, because Africana Studies is where I was introduced to all of the writers who have had the greatest influence on me, whether that be James Baldwin or Toni Morrison, Gloria Naylor. Shout out to Gloria Naylor, who was also a Brooklyn College alum, um, or Alice Walker, or Gail Jones, or Wallace Thurman, and the list goes on and on and on. That department was where I was introduced to um, all of these writers, all of their works, and where, to be honest, the question came from that prompted the prophets, because I was reading all of this work and realizing that Black queer characters don't show up until maybe the Harlem Renaissance, but there's no, prior to that, they're only mentioned in the context of like rape or sexual assault, but never in the context of love. And I asked myself, well, why is that? And that led me on my journey to like research and try to find where characters like Samuel and Isaiah could have possibly existed, if they actually existed. Um, and I really couldn't find anything, nothing of significant import. And that led me back to Toni Morrison, who said, if you cannot find the book you wish to read, then you must write it. And I realized maybe toward the end of my undergraduate career that I was going to have to write this book, and I was really, really scared to write it.
Why were you scared?
Well, because based on the research that I started doing, because there's a certain segment of Black communities that feels as though the reason why any Black person is queer or trans is because of slavery itself. That slavery was such a traumatic experience that it corrupted us and made us into sort of um, a perversion of normal humanity. But the research you discover really no. Queer people and trans people have always existed, particularly on the continent of Africa. It was widespread through many villages, many nations, many peoples. It was not until the encounter with Europe, with Christian missionaries and European colonizers who saw this queerness and this transness treated as normal and said, no, this is perversion, and used their power and influence to make us think those things were abnormal. That is the impetus of transphobia and homophobia. It is actually a European thing, not something that is native to African understandings. So once I discovered that, I knew that I would have to illustrate it. And that would put me in direct conflict with a lot of Black Christians who believe in their bones that homosexuality and transgenderness is sinful and is the result of white pathology. Because now my book is contradicting that, and the research, the truth, contradicts that point of view. So I was scared to have to um, communicate that, knowing the opposition that I would face if I did.
I want to I want to go further into that. Have you had any like backlash from the book at all, like particularly from the Christian community, or have you been like, has the experience with like how the book has come out, like you were on the New York Times bestseller list, like has ha, has the positive like overshadowed any negative feedback that you've received?
Um, that's a good question. I have faced a kind of backlash. Um, it in a way that's surreptitious, not obvious. Um, but I will also say that no one has directly said to me, um, based on things like the content of the book in terms of my critique of race, my critique of white supremacy, my critique of homophobia and transphobia. No one has directly come to me and said, you're blasphemous, or I hate you because you did these things, or you're a liar. No one has said that to me directly. Indirectly, yes. But for the most part, um, what I have received is mostly positive um, feedback from people who said that this was the book they were waiting for, or they loved the beautiful language, or they were educated by the things that I included in this book. That's what I mostly receive. I have not really received, in at least not in any direct way, the negative part of it, thankfully.
Good, because I'll be out there ready. Um, so I also wanted to talk about blood memory, but like in talking, I also thought about something else within the book, like how within the book you built a land acknowledgement. Like it was like, because the land was also a character in itself in the book, like I just wanted to like acknowledge the land acknowledgement that you had throughout the book, because it wasn't just about um you know, it wasn't just about captivity and the captors, it was also about the spirit, our spirit, as well as the spirit of the land and how the land reacted to the presence of people who are captive in a basically enslaved. I don't like that word. But yeah. So,
You are the very first person I have spoken to that has acknowledged that piece of it, that theme, those themes that run through the book, because they're not super obvious, but I wanted that they were wholly intentional, and I wanted to ensure that when I talk about Turtle Island, which is now called the United States of America or North America, when I talk about this landmass, I want to acknowledge that there were people here before. There were civilizations here before. There were nations and cultures and peoples here before. And we always talk about America as though it didn't begin until 1492. Like it was a completely empty place, just waiting to be molded and shaped by these European invaders. I wanted to acknowledge through the lens of the land that the land remembers, the land understands that there was a time before where the people who occupied this lived mostly in harmony with it and not did not have an adversarial relationship to the land. And the land itself recognizes this and knows it and responds in ways that could be in kind and in sometimes in ways that are disappointment and fear and um, tiredness. And so, thank you for pointing that out because I've never been asked that question before. No one's ever made note of it.
oh, I guess because I'm an anthropologist. Like, as I was reading it, I saw the land acknowledged in every single chapter. It wasn't just like it was it was a part of Maggie's story, it was a part of Amos's story, it was even a part of James's story. Like the land was it was just like you can tell because like the barn itself was its own character,
Mhm.
I feel, and the land under the barn was always happy. It wasn't very moist. There was no mold in the barn, and I felt like that was deliberate because the land was acknowledged in it and the land acknowledged who was on it.
Yes.
And that, I really picked that up. Well, that's how I read the book. I read the book.
Come on with your
Um
analyses.
so like I do like wanted to acknowledge that before I got into blood memory. Um so as I was reading, I did recognize a lot of the characters. And I wanted to ask, like, since blood memory was a theme throughout the book, and since I feel like even though this is historical fiction, Samuel and Keode are real to me. They are real, even though that may not have been their names. We may not know their exact stories. Maybe they're a combination of different stories. They felt real to me. Maggie felt real to me. Sarah was real to me. So I just wanted to know, like, did how did your own blood memory like create these characters, or was it your blood that spoke to you to bring their stories?
That's a great question. So, um, the process of writing is like, I think maybe 20% conscious and 80% sub or unconscious. Because there are often times in the writing process when you're writing and things are flowing through you and it feels as though it's coming from someplace other than you. And for large portions of the prophets, I felt like the words were coming from someplace other than me. It might have been me, but someplace that maybe I buried or someplace that was really, really deep, deep, deep in my subconscious. But they started to erupt in ways that I felt were ancestral. I started to recall my time as a child in the South. My mother's side of the family um, is from South Carolina. My father's side of the family is from Georgia. And I spent a great deal of time in the South as a kid during summers, visiting family and such. And I could remember things like how the South smelled different from the North, how the people talked different from the people in the North, how the people in the South had a way about them, a pace, a smile, a stern sort of discipline that was different than people in the North. And these things I found comfort in. The South looked different from the North. And so I um, drew on these memories of not just place, but of people like my great aunt Annie, who her and her husband actually built their house, which was basically little more than a shack, but built their house on the land in which my great aunt Annie's grandmother was enslaved on. And they built that house with their hands, their bare hands. And I remember how she had a garden and she had a pump for water in the front, and that had the sweetest water I have ever tasted in my life. So all of these things were coming back to me, and they were forming people like Maggie and Sarah, because Annie was one of 11 children, and and they were mostly girls. They were like maybe 4 boys and 7 girls, something like that. And these women had to carry themselves in a particular way because these were the days, and I'm saying these were the days like these still aren't the days, where being a Black woman walking on the road was in itself a danger, like it is
Mm.
now. It is a danger. So they were ready with razor blades in their cheeks, and they were fighting men. They were fighting like what we consider masculine men. My great aunts fought like that. And I wanted to pay homage to that sort of strength and power and resilience and also vulnerability, because that's the part that people don't get, is that you only have to be strong like that because you're always being victimized because of your vulnerabilities. So when I created characters like Maggie, they're coming out of that tradition, out of that understanding of my family, which, because it's embedded in me now, Annie's gone. All of her sisters are gone. All of her brothers are gone. Um, but they live in me, in memory, but in ways that, like, scientists are now looking at this idea of epigenetics, where you can pass, they think you can actually
Mhm.
pass traumas and other things on to your kids through biology. um, I somehow feel that those experiences, that my great grandmother Mary, who was Annie's sister, Annie, and all of the others, something has been passed on to me that I can't remember, but is in my soul and in my spirit as a memory, which I recognize as blood memory. And so I want to make sure that I pay close attention to those things that I think are just flights of fancy, and use them to sort of tell this story and maybe tell my family line in ways that I'm not even aware of.
Yeah. I mean, I could talk to you about this for hours, but I know we have to wrap this up. I'll probably call you later and we just talk about this. Um, is there anything that you want to like? Do you have a message for the Brooklyn College community, or just like anything for people who are just now starting to read the book? And because you know, people may be somewhere in the middle, or they haven't gotten to the end, or they're struggling with it. Do you have a message that you want to give?
I would say that The Prophets is not an easy read, and that is intentional. The books that I find have the biggest impact on me and stay with me the longest and are so influential in how I show up in the world as a human being are the ones that I struggle with, that I don't initially understand, that I have to continue to go back to glean meaning. Um, Novels like Toni Morrison's Beloved, or James Baldwin's Go Tell It on the Mountain, books that seem esoteric initially, and then something happens, a snap, and suddenly I understand, and I feel like I have been elevated as a result of that understanding. So I would say that for anybody that is struggling with the prophets, or or finds that its subject matter is difficult, to please give yourself the patience, the time, to go back, to stop and go back. And maybe you'll read it one time and be like, I don't know what I just read. Put it away and come back to it later. Because as Toni Morrison said, that, my dear, is called reading.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you so much for having me.